Hey friends, welcome back to this channel. This is the 7th video on the endocrine system. In our previous videos we have discussed about the endocrine system, about the different chemical classification and common aspects of hormones. We have discussed about the priming effect and desensitization, down regulation. We have discussed about autocrine and paracrine system. Now the video links of all these things are there in the description box. Also you can find the link over here. This is the link for the whole series. Okay, now today our main topic is how the hormone actually work. So this is the mechanism of action. Our agenda today is first to see the overview of the mechanism of action for different hormones, then how the hormones which are bound to different receptors, how they work, and how there are some hormones which are using the secondary messengers for their activity, how they work. So as you can see from our agendas that there are two different types of hormones: hormone which can bind with the nuclear receptors and hormones that can use the secondary messengers. Now what are the secondary messengers? Secondary messengers are small molecules which help in the cell signaling system. Okay, we'll deep dive into the secondary messenger in future when we'll discuss about the cell signaling and all. So for now, just remember that secondary messengers are very small molecules which can help in the cell signaling system, like calcium, like we have diacylglycerol or DAG, we have IP3, that is ionocetyl triphosphate, and all. We'll discuss about them. So let's first start with the overview. Now we all know that functioning of a hormone, we require two cells basically. One, the source cell, another one is the target cell, and the target cell must be containing specific receptors. So the target cell should be a complementary target cell. That means it should contain the specific receptors where the hormone can bind so that it can form hormone receptor complex and the hormone can have its own effect. Okay, now I'll discuss about the receptors for mechanism of action. These receptors are mainly important. Now there are specific receptors we can divide based on the affinity. One is high affinity receptor, another one is low capacity or low affinity receptors. Now what are the high affinity receptors? You can obviously say that high affinity receptors are better. Why they are high affinity receptors? Because they will not get saturated too soon. When one hormone is having its effect, there should be a certain concentration of that hormone that should come and bind with the receptors. So that concentration is quite higher in this case, that is high affinity receptor. If you have a basic idea about the enzyme then and you know what is Km, we can say that for this high affinity receptors the Km is low. Okay, so Km is low means affinity is high, but for low capacity receptor we can say that the Km is high and the affinity is low. That means they will get saturated whenever there is a small amount of hormones. Okay, so they will get saturated too early. So there is a saturation of receptor, and we now know that saturation of receptor leads to desensitization and the uncoupling of HR complex. That means hormone receptor complex. So if the hormone receptor complex gets uncoupled, that means hormone is having no further effect, right? So that is the thing. Now what are the different locations of hormone receptors? There are basically two locations. One is the nuclear receptor, another one is the membrane receptors. Now for the nuclear receptors we have two different types of hormone which can bind with these nuclear receptors. One is the steroid hormone and second one is the thyroid hormone. Now let's see how this steroid hormone works. Well, so for steroid hormone, let's first see how steroid hormone actually go and bind with this hormone receptor complex and reaches to the nucleus. So this is the H means this is the hormone. We are discussing about the steroid hormone. You can see that this is the blood vessel, and this is the target cell. So one very important thing is steroid hormone cannot just come and enter within this target cell. To transport this steroid hormone through blood, there is a specific protein called the carrier protein. This carrier protein bind with this hormone and it transport steroid hormone from its source cell to the target cell. In the near vicinity of this target cell, this hormone and carrier proteins, they get detached, and now the hormone alone can enter into the target cell. This is the target cell cytoplasm. This is the target cell nucleus. Now in the target cell cytoplasm, the steroid hormone binds with a receptor protein. For now you just have a look that this receptor protein contains two parts. This is one part and this is the second part. So hormone can come and bind with this part, okay, this round shaped part, and then it forms the HR complex or hormone receptor complex. Now this hormone receptor complex from this cell periphery comes to the cell interior near the nucleus, and this hormone receptor complex enter into the nucleus. This is called translocation. This receptor for steroid hormone, it contains both the nuclear import signal and nuclear export signal. So this hormone receptor complex enter into the nucleus, and then it can bind with the DNA, and it causes or it promotes the transcription of specific mRNA. This mRNA then comes out of this nucleus into the cytoplasm and undergo translation. So subsequent protein is synthesized, and this protein will have its own effect. That means the steroid hormone response is now complete. Now in this part we need to have a detailed view on what is the structure of this receptor protein and how it binds with the DNA. Now this is the receptor protein, and as I have already mentioned that it contains two parts. One is the ligand binding protein where the hormone can come and bind. Another one is the DNA binding protein. This part is mainly associated with the binding of DNA. That means it can go and attach with the DNA. So that is called DNA binding protein, okay, or DNA binding domain, DBD. Now let's say this is the DNA where this hormone receptor complex will bind, and this part, this is the target gene. That means this is the part from where the mRNA will produced, and this mRNA will have its protein translated, and then the steroid hormone response will be seen. So let's say this is the target gene. Just in the proximity of this target gene we have an element that is called hormone response element, where the hormone receptor complex can come and bind. Now this hormone response element, we can divide this into two half sites. So this is one half site and this is another half site. When the steroid hormone bind with this receptor, one hormone receptor complex can bind with this half site, and another hormone receptor complex can come and bind with this half site. So within one hormone response element there is two steroid hormone receptor complex. So that is called dimerization of the receptor. And since here both the hormone receptor complex are steroid hormone and its respective receptor, we can say that this is a homodimerization. And then when this homodimerization is done, then the mRNA transcription and translation happens. Hope that is clear to you. So this is steroid hormone, the mechanism of action of steroid hormone. Now let's see about the thyroid hormone. Remember this, both the steroid hormone and thyroid hormone, they are taking the nuclear receptors. So they are the hormones that bind with the nuclear receptors. Now let's see about the thyroid hormones. Okay. For simplicity, let's first talk about the receptor or the hormone response element for that. Now you can see that for thyroid hormone, this is this yellow color receptor is the for thyroid hormone receptor, that is for triiodothyronine. And there is another different type of receptor, that is the RXR receptor, which is for 9-cis-retinoic acid. Okay, now again we have the DNA, this is the target gene, and this is the hormone response element, and we can divide this hormone response element into two half sides. Now see a very interesting thing here. When triiodothyronine comes and bind with this thyroid hormone receptor, it is attaching with one half site of this hormone response element. In another half site, there is a binding of this RXR, that means retinoic acid. Retinoic acid receptor get bind, and it is associated with the 9-cis-retinoic acid. So here also dimerization is happening, but what is happening is heterodimerization, not homodimerization. Previously in the steroid hormone we have seen that there is a homodimerization. That means both these are steroid hormone receptor but in this case the thyroid hormone, there is a heterodimerization. One is for the triiodothyronine or T3 and another one is for 9-cis retinoic acid or RXR receptor. So this is one major difference between the steroid hormone and the thyroid hormone mechanism of action. Now another very interesting thing is, in this case what we have seen that, see, the receptor is actually present in the cytoplasm and hormone receptor complex is formed in the cytoplasm. This hormone receptor complex enters into the nucleus and then binds with the hormone response element or with the DNA. But in this case what happens is, the receptor is already bound with the DNA. So T3 will come, we'll see in the next slide that T3 comes and bind with the receptor which is already associated with the DNA. So the DNA binding domain of both of these receptors are already associated with the DNA. Okay, so that is another thing. So now let's see how this T3 receptor or thyroid hormone receptor works. See, when the thyroid hormone is present in the blood, they are present as tetraiodothyronine or T4 and they are associated with the carrier protein. Now in the close vicinity of the target cell, the carrier protein and T4 complex is dissociated and T4 gets released. Now T4 enter into the target cell. Very major point over here to follow is T4 gets converted into T3. So here is another difference between steroid hormone and thyroid hormone mechanism of action. While in steroid hormone there is no change in the hormone itself, okay, but in this case the T4 gets converted into T3, so there is a change in the hormone itself. T3 contain a binding protein. Remember, this is not the receptor for T3, this is just the binding protein for T3, which will take this T3 from this periphery of the cell to the internal cell interior or internal side of the cell near the nucleus. When this binding protein and T3 complex comes near the nucleus, this complex, it is disintegrated and T3 gets out. Now this T3 alone will enter into the nucleus and will get attached to the thyroid hormone receptor which is already bound with the DNA. For simplicity, I have not shown the retinoic acid receptor in this case, but remember there is always a heterodimerization. Okay, so this T3 enter into the nucleus, it binds with the thyroid hormone receptor which is already been associated with the DNA. There is a subsequent heterodimerization where the retinoic acid receptor will be associated with the retinoic acid and it will cause the transcription of specific mRNA, and that specific mRNA now will come out of this nucleus and will cause protein synthesis. That means translation of the mRNA will be done, and through this protein synthesis thyroid hormone will have their own response. Okay, so it's better to compare the steroid hormone and thyroid hormone receptors and see how they work. So for steroid hormone receptor, we can say that there is no change in the hormone itself. The receptor is actually present in the cell cytoplasm. The hormone receptor complex enter into the nucleus. It causes homodimerization and it is bound with the DNA as a homodimer. But in case of thyroid hormone, we have to say that there is a change in the hormone itself in the target cell cytoplasm. So T4 gets converted into T3. There is one binding protein involved. In case of steroid hormone there is no binding protein, but in case of thyroid hormone there is a binding protein involved within the target cell. Okay, the receptor of this thyroid hormone is actually present within the nucleus and remain attached with the DNA through DNA binding domain, and there is a heterodimerization, not homodimerization, there is a heterodimerization while we discuss the thyroid hormone. So that is the thing. I hope that makes sense. And so we have already discussed about the steroid hormone and thyroid hormones. In the next video we'll discuss about those hormones which use the secondary messengers. If this content was helpful, please make sure to subscribe, like, share and comment. See you in the next video. Bye.